Well, a new study finds that there is not evidence that suggests that bodily gender transition helps people with gender dysphoria. Here is the study. It's from the Current Sexual Health Reports. And it says that the results of long term studies on adult transgender populations fail to demonstrate convincing improvements in mental health. And some studies suggest that there are treatment associated harms. What this study did was collect all of the research that is out there so far. Now, here we're talking about transgender people who take steps to change their bodies physically from one biological gender to the opposite one. What trans rights activists and politicians also say about this is that changing gender helps save lives and it helps cure or relieve gender dysphoria, even though there never has been any research to suggest that it does. The same is true with all dysphorias, actually. For instance, anorexia is a bodily dysphoria where you feel extremely anxietized about the way you see your body. Never has any research been done to suggest that just starving someone with anorexia could make them feel better, making their body sort of mirror their own dysphoria. So why we think gender dysphoria would be solved in another way, I'm not sure. And if you really think about it, how could we expect some kind of medicalization to cure dysphoria? The body will fight to stay its biological gender forever. It never ends because DNA exists. And so you will always have this DNA structure telling your body to be a reproductive male or a reproductive female. And if you get off the meds or stop dressing like the opposite sex or stop using makeup, you morph back. And obviously, that's a highly anxietizing place for somebody to live in a way that you can never just be. It always requires a lot of effort, pain, and drugs, pharmaceuticals. Also worth noting that gender dysphoria is highly correlated with anxiety, and studies show that anxiety sticks around after that gender transition too. What trans rights activists, or I call them TRAs, just to be easy on my diction, they argue that if someone transitions their gender early, there are low rates of regret and that this is their only chance of a happy life. Again, how other dysphorias are treated is not like, yeah, let's change your body to make you look like what you think, right? Instead, they support that person to say, how can we help you feel better about the body that you've got right now? That's typically how other dysphorias are treated. Now, again, this idea that early transition saves lives has never been proven. And the study out this week that we're talking about from Current Sexual Health shows the opposite, says despite claims of life-saving nature of gender transition for adults, none of the many studies convincingly demonstrated enduring psychological benefits. The longest term studies with the strongest methodologies reportedly marked increased morbidity and mortality and a persistently high rate of post-transition suicide among adults. What they're referring to are studies done in Europe, where they actually did follow people who used medical transition and cross-sex hormones, and found that there was a high incidence in the people who stayed on them of cancers and suicides. It's incredibly sad. Now, the study goes through 10 assumptions that TRAs make and then points out the lack of research to prove any one of these things that is said on the internet, sort of to promote what they call trans rights, a term that I find highly problematic because trans people in America, at least, already have rights. What they mean when they say trans rights, and most of their rights were obtained through the gay equality civil rights movements and other civil liberties movements. So what they mean when they say trans rights is not their right to dress in a certain way or be a certain way or change their names. What they're saying here is they want an open medicine cabinet for and that's what they sort of house under the term trans rights. Now, we're not going to go through the detail of each of these things but I do want to point out what they are, because these are the things that are said online without science to back it up, without long-term studies. A lot of times these studies just can't be done on children because it's unethical. For instance, studies on breast binding. They just can't study that long-term in young women because it hurts them. And because, like, how can you, bind off the breasts of young girls and then study them against girls who weren't given that? It's extremely unethical.
Yeah, because they're still growing at that stage too. Like you're still in the growth of your life. So it's like you can cut something as a child, but it's still growing. So it's like you'd have to keep doing that until.
Absolutely.
I mean, there's not like a root.
Yeah. And your hormones are still trying to communicate with a body part that is no longer there. And in fact, it doesn't decrease the for instance, at my last mammogram, I was told that because I nursed for something like 45 months that I had, except 3 kids. I didn't nurse one child for 45 months. I had lowered my incidence, my risk of breast cancer because of the nursing, right? And so this is something that a biological woman will never be able to do to lower the incidence of breast cancer, right? The body will still want to have mammaries and produce and the hormones exist, but there's just no way. There is no way to study this because it's extremely unethical to do this to young kids. So we just do it. Then we just do it.
It's amazing. I was thinking about in my family, my uncle had schizophrenia. Right, suffered from schizophrenia. Imagine if society then reordered itself, and he would have hallucinations, right? Yeah. Voices, and he would go to his room, put on records, and smoke cigarettes. Like, this is what he did. My uncle did years ago, and that was how he calmed his voices. And then there was medicine and stuff. But imagine that's a mental disorder, right? It's a mental disorder. Imagine if all of society was forced to sort of reorient itself around his delusions.
Yes, and gender dysphoria is still considered a type of mental illness, and it is diagnosed in medical books, psychological and medical books. And so it puts trans rights activists at sort of between a rock and a hard place because they want to present it as something that is not a disorder, but then they want to present it as something that requires medicine and surgery.
How do you square those two?
And so you can't.
You can't. Right? It's literally listed in psychological in psychology books as a mental disorder.
And there are guidebooks for practicing psychologists for how to treat it. So anyway, let's go through just briefly these things that you may see on the internet, and you will now know there is not science behind these claims. First, the emergence of trans identity is the result of reaching a higher level of self-awareness. So at the same time we realize that kids are being made dumber by TikTok, we're saying they're also just that much wiser. They have more self-awareness. Whether the trans identity emerges in very young children, older children, teens, or adults, it is authentic and it will be lifelong. That's what they're saying. Don't question it came on pretty late. They never showed any signs of this. Yes, but it always was there. You just didn't see it, and it will last a whole lifetime. Again, the research shows that most gender dysphoria resolves itself by age 18, and that most of these kids turn out to be pretty healthy, functioning gay adults. 3, all gender identity variations are biologically determined and inherently healthy. 4, the frequently co-occurring psychiatric symptoms are a direct result of gender incongruence. Whatever pain you have, it's because you are authentically the opposite sex and your body does not reflect that. And in fact, in Scotland, this week, there is a person who was convicted of murder, biological man, who transitioned since being in prison and is asking the Scottish government to give that person full gender transition surgery because they say that had they been in the right body, they would not have committed those crimes. This is the argument that I was so upset with having a penis and I hate it so much that, I wouldn't have been violent otherwise. Number 5, the only way to relieve or prevent psychiatric problems is to alter the body at the earliest signs of puberty. There's no research to support that. Psychological evaluations and attempts to address psychiatric comorbidities should only be used to support transition, nothing else. Attempts to resolve gender dysphoria with psychotherapy range from ineffective to harmful. And here we see the reason that we have sort of co-opted the term, conversion therapy, that if you don't if you try to resolve gender dysphoria with anything other than validating someone's identified gender, then that's harmful and called conversion therapy. So you take a biological boy who wants to identify as a girl and you tell that person, well, let's see if we can make you comfortable as a boy without sort of conforming gender stereotypes, and just paint your nails if you want to. That is conversion therapy by current definitions. Number 8, gender dysphoric youth must have unquestioned social, hormonal, and surgical support. Period. Open medicine cabinet, open surgical offerings. All individuals, number 9, all individual embodiment goals, even those that do not occur in nature, must be fulfilled to the full extent possible. Number 10, science has proven the benefits of early gender transition. Low rates of regret and detransition further validate the practice. That's absolutely not true. In fact, the data does prove the opposite. The authors conclude that this is a high stakes debate and it should not come at the expense of using experimental methods on treatment. They say the field must stop relying on social justice argument and return to time-honored principles of evidence-based medicine. But authorities, especially in the U.S., don't want to do that. In fact, in Oregon, a new bill is called HB 2002, would push children down a one-way path to medicalization. It says that children over 15 can legally consent to being sterilized. That's literally what it says. And that Medicare and private insurance must cover gender transition. Now, I heard a tiff. Anybody want to?
No,
that was my chair moving because I just leaned in. But Washington State, on top of what you just said, launched a bill, and it passed the Senate and Congress already, where if a kid is having that and they run away from home, they go to a clinic, they have to give them this gender affirming care, and the place does not have to let the parents know that they even have the kid. And then if the parent tries to look into what has happened, they cannot release the information to the parent. Yeah. And there's no age mentioned at all as a limit.
Right. There are a lot of bills like that, especially in California as well. Now, when gender critical therapist, a licensed therapist, Stephanie Wynn, worked with State Representative Ed Deal to, at the very least, add amendments to this bill to support children who detransition, which is more common than TRAs want you to think, that language was removed. Now, think about that. The state wants to support children towards transitioning, but they will not support them from detransitioning. In fact, there's not a lot of doctors who even know how, because again, we have a lack of science here. Here is Representative Deal explaining what he's up against, and I tried to just sort of go through his Twitter feed so we can read it. He says that with this bill, Medicaid and private insurance are mandated to cover treatments with your gender when your gender and identity and sex don't align. But if you believe you made a mistake and want a procedure to align with your sex, coverage will not be mandated. The wording is intentionally, the bill is worded intentionally. He proposed 11 amendments to the bill for adding coverage for detransition treatments and was flatly rejected by Democrats. Why? Doesn't it seem like a compassionate thing to do? He says, we know some children are being harmed with these treatments. Shouldn't we offer them the opportunity to correct the mistakes made by medical professionals? Here he talks about studies showing that between 7 and 30% of people who transition will detransition. I've seen those numbers even go as high as 60%. He says within about 10 years, that's enough for the UK, Sweden, Norway, and several other European countries to put the brakes on gender affirming treatment and limit it to clinical settings or ban it outright for minors. In Oregon, however, we are full steam ahead, ignoring these evidence-based studies and the European response. I'm sorry, it doesn't work for me to read this along. I tried that. It didn't work. I won't do that again. By just sort of scrolling through that. But I'm telling you what he's saying. Now, what he was told that detransition was not necessary to put in the bill because they already have gender affirming. Here's the explanation he received saying, having established coverage, if we say it's gender affirming, then arguably that does cover detransition. Arguably. Meaning there would be an argument not to. right? I guess what they're saying is that if someone is biological male, wants to transition to female, and then wants to transition back to female, they would get gender affirming care for each stage, no matter how many times they go back and forth. So whatever someone wants to affirm, healthcare then would affirm. But the word arguably there gives me pause, because that means there's argument to ditch these kids. Like, oh, you wanted to do this. Sorry, we cut your boobs off. You didn't want that? Well, we can't give you boobs back. We can't just keep going back and forth. I mean, you can imagine that you could make the argument that someone should have boobs taken off, put on, taken off, put off, right? Like you just keep going.
Right.
And Medicare would cover that.
Right. Why wouldn't they? If you could just flip-flop your decision-making back and forth, back and forth.
I mean, you can't do that with a penis, as far as I know. It would be,
Not to my knowledge.
You would suffer horrendous infections.
If anyone wants to try it,
They
let
should
us
just
know.
make boob jackets and penis panties. Like, just wear those and test it out for a year.
But no, they're asking for Medicare to cover this for full-on medicalization, right? So it's not just like that little bitty bop that I've shown you, which is like a knitted penis that you can put in biological girls' underwear so they feel more like boys. That exists. I won't show it to you right now. Is it bitty bop or bitty? Anyway.
That seems
doesn't
like it'd
matter.
be itchy if it's knitted. I don't know.
Yeah, I guess. Are you Googling it?
No.
Oh, okay. No, again.
We
I
don't want
that.
to Google knitted penises.
I don't want that in my search
Right.
history.
But is there a reason?
Yeah, just I'm sure if you just look up knitting needle and penis, you won't find anything that'll traumatize you for the rest of the day.
No, thank you.
I can find it actually. I was just talking to a person about it. But okay, never mind.
So that Natalie's going to look it up. No.
I know. I already have super weird things served to me because of the kind of research we do. Now, again, the idea that like you can't even add detransition to your bill because you can't admit that it exists, that's just incredibly troubling. Now, as long as we're on the subject of gender ideology, we should let you know that President Biden says that he plans to veto a bill to keep biological males out of female sports if it passes Congress. This is the HR 734. It's up for a vote in the House. It is favored to pass the House, but most likely not the Senate. And why? Why must male athletes compete with women? I again refer you to Helen Joyce's book, Trans, where she gives a full history of men competing in women's sports. This has happened for decades before gender ideology was the reason. I mean, mostly it was to win, just because they had a better chance of winning. And while companies sort of try to show themselves progressive and pro-trans rights, one company has decided to go exactly the opposite way. And we want to show you the commercial. And you let us know whether you think this is sort of pandering to the opposite of Budweiser, or if it's actually a legitimate, where'd our lights go? If it's a legitimate advertisement. You watch this and we'll figure out what happened to the lights in here.
When I was a little girl, I had this dream that seemed so impossible. I was going to be the fastest runner in the world.
It will be a new world record.
I got this little nugget of an idea from my dad. He used to watch me run and say, "Ain't no woman alive that can beat you." And I believed him. He made me feel invincible. It wasn't easy. I trained hard, harder than anyone else I know. But I was made for this. I was an unstoppable force, a life dedicated to perfection. But even perfection wouldn't be enough.
All right. So let me know
Wow.
what you think about that in the chat, whether you
That
think
was
it's
powerful. I loved
Yeah?
it.
Yeah, I saw that the other day. I thought, wow, that's all right. Finally,
It gave me
companies are
goosebumps.
standing up for this craziness.
Yeah, it's very interesting to go the absolute opposite direction and validate exactly how hard a female athlete has to work if they no longer have the biological advantage in their category.
Thank you so much for watching this segment here at Redacted. We are live every day at 4 p.m. Eastern Time, trying to share the stories that the mainstream media will not cover. You should also come over and join our community of Redacted Rebels over at redacted.inc. That's our private locals community where we can share exclusive content that we simply cannot share here on YouTube. Come over and join the rebellion together right now by going to redacted.inc. We'll see you next time.